Hello everyone, this is part 9 of What If Naruto Was Like the Sage of Six Paths, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Is it just me or is it getting warmer down here? The two were making their way down the winding staircase they found. It may not have been the smartest thing they had ever done, however, no matter what their lives had been like, they were still prepubescent kids and their curiosity won out. Fu just looked around as the earthen walls were slowly replaced by metal as the staircase continued to spiral down. It is most likely this area of the compound is either heated or lacks ventilation to prevent exposure or infiltration. It is fairly common practice when creating a forward base in enemy territory. Naruto just sighed as he refrained from trailing his arms along the walls again, wary from what happened last time. Great, so we managed to stumble across another secret base. Fu looked at him curiously for a moment as the blonde chuckled anxiously. Long story, but we accidentally found an underground base in Kusa no Kuni. Turned out this guy was guarding it who could turn his body into mud, kept saying stuff about protecting the base and Orochimaru-sama. I beat him and we left, didn't really feel like sticking around after he almost killed Shizuku. Fu just looked even more intrigued as she returned her gaze straight ahead. You're sure he said Orochimaru? Naruto just nodded while Fu's gaze turned thoughtful like she was remembering something and trying to get the details right. Orochimaru, S-rank Nin from Konohagakure no Sato, previous member of the Densetsu no Sannin and holder of the snake summoning contract, do not approach. Naruto blinked in surprise as the stairway finally leveled out, turning into a long metallic corridor with only 2 rooms on either side. That was very comprehensive. Fu just nodded succinctly as she made her way over to the left-hand door. I was encouraged to memorize the bingo book for reference on missions. Naruto could quite easily hear the spite in her voice as she spoke. Wait. He quickly grabbed Fu's hand before she could lay it on the door. There are seals covering the door. I'm not sure what they do, but I don't think they're going to make us feel good. Fu just blinked calmly before retracting her hand, allowing Naruto instead to reach forward and drain the chakra from the seals. Wow. They really put a lot of chakra in these, they really didn't want anybody getting in here. Eventually he stopped, now satisfied the door was completely harmless, even so when he went to open it he found it was locked. Ha, as if that'll keep me out. Banshu Tenon. Almost immediately the door began to crumple, buckling out as if struck by some enormous force on the other side. Fu was actually surprised it was still holding with so much apparent strain on the metal. Eventually though the sturdy door was completely ripped from its hinges, forcing Naruto to dodge to one side in order to avoid it crushing him against the other side of the corridor. He grinned, rubbing his hands together expectantly as he walked inside, only to frown. What the? It's just a load of drawers. Sure enough, the room was completely lined with drawers, ranging from old wooden ones to more modern metal filing cabinets. There were even a few desks in the corners with various papers strewn across their surfaces. You should not be so quick to dismiss. If the information here was guarded so thoroughly, it is sure to be valuable, at least to somebody. She idly moved to one of the desks, picking up a loose sheet from one of the many stacks. It was mostly incomprehensible to her, but she could at least glean it was some kind of blueprint. To what she couldn't say though. Naruto likewise began looking at the various drawers, now noticing many were labeled with names of either places or people. Most prevalent were the shinobi villages, and not just the main ones, there were places like Hoshigakure and Tanagakure among others. Oh hey, this one's got the name of that guy we faced in Kusa that I was telling you about. Interested, Fu grabbed the manila file with the name, Madara, printed in the upper right corner. She flicked through the contents which were, once again, mostly lost on her being scientific jargon. However, one sheet caught her eye in particular which she drew out to read under better light. Subject 17 shows incredible promise adapting to the splicing treatment. Chakra paper tests prove an unimaginable affinity for Earth which was previously non-existent. Full range of abilities unknown. Recommend observation in isolated base until further testing authorized. Results of test to be used in treatments classified. Nadime H2, and Sora U7. She looked up to see Naruto's confused face, which unknowingly mirrored her own. What does all that mean? Fu shrugged absently as she continued to flick through the file, growing more and more disgusted as she went. It appeared somebody was forcibly attempting to create affinities in somebody by using gene splicing techniques. Based on the fact this is subject 17 and the first one to show positive result, I would say the treatments are not that effective. Naruto felt a little queasy at that. He had seen Madara firsthand. The treatment had been very successful from his perspective. Fu quickly set the file down and began scanning the files again until she found the one labeled Nadime H2. Naruto, I believe you should read this one. It appears they repeated the procedure but with cells from the Nadime Hokage and a member of the Hozuki clan. From that alone it is obvious they were attempting to create the perfect water affinity, and well, read for yourself. Naruto did, carefully flicking between the various pages filled with detailed medical reports, test notes as well as a list and profiles of all the subjects, which happened to be unfortunately lengthy. Finally he put it down, his hand on his chin as he frowned deeply at the floor. And you think? He left it hanging but got a quick nod from Fu, who didn't seem quite as disturbed as he did. Then again he wondered if she actually saw the wrong in these experiments in the first place. It is quite possible. The listed attributes the various subjects displayed is eerily similar. Naruto nodded grimly. What Fu said was completely true, down to the T. But this said there were no survivors. Fu just shrugged, idly flicking through another report but not finding much more of interest. It's quite possible reports can be falsified or missing. Naruto just sighed into his hand, fingering the file anxiously and wishing the room was large enough to pace in. Should we tell her? Fu just gave Naruto a deadpan look, causing the boy to give another drawn-out sigh. Right, not so good on the people skills. Fu just looked down for a moment only for Naruto to give her a reassuring pat on the back. It's all right, we'll sleep on it for now. With that he grabbed the file and sealed it into one of his pouches before quickly walking out of the room. Fu followed but gave a curious glance back at the room. We are just going to leave it like this. Naruto smirked quietly as his eyes took on a dangerous edge, looking rather ominous as they glowed. Oh no, these experiments are sick. I'm destroying any trace of them, and if I ever find the man who was responsible for all this. He left that statement hanging, but Fu could easily feel the sheer anger in his words, despite them being rather cold and even. There'll be nothing left when I'm through. He turned back to the room and began channeling his chakra through his hands rapidly, faster and faster until it began to heat up and convert into fire-natured chakra. Fu could only watch in a great deal of amazement as Naruto's hands burst into bright orange flame, yet his hands seemed completely unharmed. He quickly went about the room, burning away any and all files he found until there was nothing left in the room but fire and ash. He finally emerged looking a great deal calmer as he allowed the flames in his hands to snuff out. He breathed out a sigh of relief before smiling at the now befuddled Jinchuriki, waving his hands to cool them off slightly. Well, I feel better. Luckily the other room on the secret floor was just some kind of operating room with a single raised table and a few shelves with nothing in. Satisfied that whoever owned this place would be severely irritated when they came back to it, Naruto and Fu made their way back up to the main floor of the base, sealing the passage behind them. Before the two went to bed though, Naruto caught Fu by the wrist softly, unknowingly making the girl blush slightly. For now, let's not tell Shizuku about this, it would be a lot to take in. Fu blinked in confusion for a moment before nodding once, earning a smile of appreciation from Naruto. I promise I will tell her, but somewhere better than here. Fu just nodded again. She had already made her peace and didn't need the reassurance, but she still found it quite nice. Good night, Naruto-san. The blonde just gave a tired sigh as he moved over to his own bed. I told you, Naruto is fine. The next day the trio set out from the base quite happily, eager to get away from there. Especially Shizuku. Naruto had woken early, or at least he thought he had. Fu in fact had been up for several hours before him. He had actually been worried at first as he had woken up only to find Fu not in her bed. Luckily he found her quite close to the entrance of the base, just sitting on a rock and waiting for the sun to rise. According to her, she had never had the time to really appreciate it before. It had only indicated a time for her to begin changing exercises. Naruto was rather pleased with the contented expression on Fu's face as they walked. It appeared an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Where before her movements had been stiff and anxious, she now had a much lighter step and a more calm face without it having to be forced. He made a silent promise to himself that, like with Shizuku, he would never allow something to hurt Fu as long as he could protect her. She deserved that at least. Crossing through Ta no Kuni proved uneventful save for a few attempts at pickpocketing the trio while passing through less than reputable towns. Luckily, most of what they owned that was precious was sealed within Naruto's pouches, including their money and supplies, and any attempt to even touch the container on Fu's back ended up with the thief on the floor, more often than not sporting a newly broken wrist. It was confusing the blonde, as from what he had been told by his master, the land of rice paddies was supposed to be a small but still economically sound country. It made sense considering they grew and provided the bulk of rice to the elemental nations, less domestic-oriented countries like Kaminari no Kuni and Kase no Kuni being nearly dependent on their crop. However, from what he could see, the people seemed run down or drained, and many had taken to thievery to just stay afloat. He had helped where he could, but a lot of the time he could see his generosity was being greatly taken advantage of. As soon as he handed out even a little bit of food to the people, he would immediately be swamped by what felt like the entire village. It was here that Naruto aptly learned that if you give a man a fish he eats for a day, give a man a fishing rod and he will sell it to buy fish anyway. He had also had an impromptu lesson on politics when he passed through a village that was struggling with their crop. He had gouged out a large trench from a nearby river with his gravity manipulation so their crops could be irrigated, only to have a multitude of mercenaries set on him by a local feudal lord that was rather displeased his water feature had stopped working. When he had found out exactly why he and his companions had been chased across half the country, he had nearly turned around to level the lord's house. By the time they finally reached the border to Unokuni, they were tired, hot and sticky, as well as very low on money and supplies. It was almost with audible relief the trio finally stopped at a local village. Naruto could practically smell the hot springs from the gate. They checked into a small onsen inn with what little money they had left before exhaustedly collapsing on their beds. They only had enough money for a single two-person room though, so in Naruto's case he exhaustedly collapsed on the small couch. Naruto wearily blinked his eyes open, rather surprised when he found himself not in the room he had collapsed in, but inside his seal instead. The usual greeting occurred of Shukaku excitedly bouncing around, Kyubi belittling him, Shukaku flying into a rage before quieting down as he once again noticed the blonde. Naruto had taken the opportunity to try something by creating one of his black chakra rods, just confirming that he could do that within the seal. Technically he could produce anything in the seal, but the rod was still flooded with his chakra. He looked up only to strangely find Shukaku's gaze firmly fixed on the rod in his hands. Slowly Naruto moved it across, watching as Shukaku's golden orbs followed it with almost palpable anticipation. Once again he slowly moved it across his body, and once again the eyes followed its movements. A devious grin spread across the boy's face as he suddenly pulled his arm back and threw the rod as hard as he could into the Ichibi's cell, firing it forward with gravity manipulation for good measure. As expected but still highly amusing, Shukaku lurched back as his head tracked the rod's flight path before suddenly scrambling backward to run after it. The great sand construct's slow lumbering steps faded off into the distance of his darkened cell. At that point the Kyubi lazily rolled its eye in Naruto's direction, its furry brow darkening for a moment as it watched Naruto swiftly slide another rod out of his sleeve. "If you throw that rod at me, I swear I will rip off the arm you used to throw it with great satisfaction." Naruto just grinned sheepishly as he allowed the rod to dissipate into a harmless dust. "Hey." The enormous fox just sighed deeply, the great breath of air causing Naruto's robes to billow out. "For what tortuous reason are you visiting me today, bearing that bastardized technique of the sage with you no less?" Naruto just blinked as he created another rod, staring down at it curiously as he turned it about in his hands. "This is one of the sage's techniques." Again the great fox snorted derisively, its red orbs narrowing in contempt. "Please, to compare your cheap conjuring trick with the sage's Banbatsu Saozu is the same as comparing a dying ember to the sun." The fox made to get close to the bars to increase his intimidating glare. "You will never be him." Naruto simply grinned right back, disturbing the chakra creature with how dismissive he could be of the fox's overwhelming presence. "I don't want to be the sage. I'm Naruto Uzumaki and I'm my own man." Quote. He frowned for a moment. Boy, whatever. He looked up with a small chuckle as the fox lay back down with its head resting on its paws. So creation of all things. That sounds impressive. Another grunt from the Kyuubi ensued as its eyes remained firmly closed, clearly telling Naruto to leave it be. So what else could he make? Silence reigned except for the steady if highly irritated breathing of the great Kitsune. Suddenly a thought struck Naruto as his shakuju appeared in his hand, as if from thin air. Did he make this with it? At that the Kyuubi cracked open an eye to glare distastefully at the boy who only grinned victoriously. Ah, so he did. The eye immediately closed again much to Naruto's silent amusement. You know, what do you really stand to lose being more cooperative? Suddenly the fox's eyes snapped open as it rose to its full height, an all too familiar and imposing grin stretched across its glistening maw. Oh, and what do I stand to gain? My freedom. Naruto smirked as he shot back without a moment of hesitation. Maybe. At that the fox blinked once, the twisted grin morphing into a more irritated snarl. Do not lie to me, ninja, it debases your already pitiful race even further. Naruto sighed but never lost his confident smile, instead settling for sitting down on the warm ground. I'm not lying. I want to free not only you, but all the Bayou, preferably where you cannot harm anybody. The fox just snorted at that, settling down once again as their impromptu staring contest continued. So that is your plan? To send us away to some far corner where we are no threat? Let the world forget about us so we can just fade away. Naruto never backed down for a moment as he stared back defiantly. And you would prefer to live on this way? Moving from host to host, a slave to whatever human fancy strikes your container. The fox finally looked away, huffing irritably in contempt. Leave, ninja, your pathetic ideals are wasted on me. I am beyond your pitiful preaching. Naruto gave a small conceding nod as he stood up, just in time for Shukaku to come lumbering back with the chakra rod happily held in its enormous jaws. Naruto rubbed the construct's head much to its delight before vanishing from the seal once again. When Naruto finally opened his eyes in the real world, he took the opportunity to stretch out his back with a loud yawn, smiling as he felt his spine crack in a few places pleasantly. He looked up with that same contented smile only to notice both beds in the room were empty. He panicked before spotting the small note plastered to the door with chakra so that he would notice. He walked over, still stretching out a few sore spots like in his neck and arms before plucking the note from the wall. Naruto, gone to hot springs. Brought Fu with me. Having girl time. Shizuku. Naruto smiled at the note. It didn't sound like a bad idea in his mind, so he quickly delved into the room's wardrobe and pulled out one of the complimentary robes. He shucked his robes, rolling his shoulders at how light he suddenly felt. He never did really appreciate just how much the weighted robes weighed until he took them off. He took a moment to look at himself in the mirror on the far wall, raising an eyebrow at what he saw. He had grown since leaving the temple, probably just above 5 foot now. His muscles had developed accordingly, but there was no immediate difference besides being slightly more noticeable. His hair had grown too, the loose ponytail he always kept his spiky locks in descending to the middle of his back, while 2 shaggy bangs had begun to form around his temples. Naruto also thought he could be imagining things, but it appeared his whisker marks had thickened ever so slightly and the area just around his eyes had darkened. In all, Naruto was rather pleased with how he had grown up over the past year. He frowned suddenly. That was right. He hadn't even fully realized almost a year had passed since he had ventured out from the temple on his pilgrimage. He sat down on the bed as he slipped on the robe, his brow furrowed slightly in thought. What had he learned in that time? He was supposed to be trying to unravel the mysteries of chakra. He knew from the offset he had not given himself an easy task, but he had expected to accomplish more in a year. He quickly shook his head. He had mastered wind and fire manipulation, discovered new things about his eyes, helped 2 fellow Jinchuriki and made a good friend. He had accomplished far more than he would have ever dreamed imaginable. Still, as he thought about his upcoming birthday, he could only reminisce over the previous year and how far he had actually come in his goal. Quickly though it passed as he noticed the note still in his hand. With a grin he picked himself up and walked out of the room. He made sure his shakuju was lying over his clothing to prevent anybody taking it. It was another ability he had discovered rather recently while searching for Taki. He found he could almost imbue the staff with his Deva path, effectively increasing its weight tenfold or conversely decreasing it to the point he could barely feel it in his hand. He hadn't tried this yet with his predator path because he wasn't exactly sure what that would do or if it would be dangerous to those around him. He quickly walked down to the hot springs, noticing they were separated into male and female, and quickly changed into a small towel he kept tied around his waist. When he walked in, he noticed he seemed to be completely alone. It was strange, but not unheard of, so he shrugged it off and lowered himself into the steaming waters. Instantly a sigh escaped his mouth as the waters began to leach the aches and worries from his body. After a while, he wasn't sure how long, but it really didn't matter by that point, his eyebrow began to visibly twitch as he lay back in the waters. A soft but highly irritating giggling kept disturbing his peaceful soak. However, when he raised his head to look around, there was nobody there. He shook his head and lay back down, dismissing it as something happening on the girls' side of the onsen. They were only separated by a single wooden wall after all. However, as it continued, Naruto was more and more sure it was coming from his side of the springs. While it was high-pitched, the voice was definitely masculine, and every so often it would be accompanied by the sound of a pencil scratching against paper. Finally, having enough, Naruto got up, still with a towel wrapped around his waist. His hair was now plastered around his head, though in a damp mess without his hair tie. He walked towards the noise, still very confused, when he ended up at a portion of the wooden wall separating the two springs. He was about to dismiss it again as being on the other side when his eyes caught a faint ripple in the air that he wouldn't have noticed if he hadn't been studying the area intently. He looked at it until he was sure it was a person using some kind of jutsu. Disturbingly, though, he couldn't see even an ounce of chakra. He waited another moment before clearing his throat. When nothing happened, he cleared his throat again. Yeah, what do you want, Gaki? Naruto was only mildly surprised when the jutsu finally dropped to reveal a man with long spiky white hair, tied up in a fashion similar to the way he did his own but much longer. He was wearing a red and green battle kimono and getter sandals with a shinobi headband that simply had the kanji for oil, making his allegiances unclear. Most strange of all, though, was the fact he was standing atop an enormous toad who, possibly even stranger still, looked incredibly embarrassed to be there. Don't you think it's rude to be spying on the female side of the onsen? The white-haired man just raised an eyebrow at the small blonde boy who had a startling resemblance to his prized student. Of course he knew it was not Minato, the 3 whisker marks in each cheek disproved that. He was confused though, it couldn't be Naruto either. Last word from his sensei told him Naruto was currently in the fire temple. However, blonde hair with whiskers was not something you saw every day, and Jiraiya was not a legendary spy master for being unobservant. It's not rude, kid, I'm giving these lovely ladies a chance to be a rare part of my research. He giggled perversely after that as a small trickle of blood leaked from the corner of his nose. He hopped down off the toad to avoid being spotted by the women on the other side. Now he was visible. Research. The man grinned broadly at that in a way Naruto found immediately uncomfortable. Ah, so you're unfamiliar with my work. Naruto just looked at him cluelessly, which was all the answer he needed before he produced a single orange book from seemingly nowhere. Here, kid, you're a little young, but it might just give you the edge later on in life. He winked at the blonde before climbing back up on the toad to continue his peeping. Jiraiya-sama, please be careful with those getter. My back is not made of stone, you know. Naruto just blinked once, then twice, and then a third time as he stared at the toad that had just talked. Quiet, Gamagaru, you'll give us away. Naruto continued to stare as the toad groaned in annoyance and discomfort, or croaked at least. Did your toad just talk? The man turned around again with an exasperated look, which also seemed relatively amused. Of course he did, he's a summon from Myobokuzen. Suddenly the man jumped off the toad with a wild flourish, allowing the poor amphibian to dispel into smoke with a relieved croak. And that of course would make me the one and only, the great and wise, the gallant Jiraiya. A few seconds went by after the man performed his little kabuki dance with just the sound of cicadas chirping in the background as Naruto stared at the man blankly. Finally Jiraiya looked down with a hint of irritation at the young blonde who just blinked back without comprehension. You have no idea who I am, do you? Naruto just shook his head once, causing the large man to flop his torso forward almost comically with an imaginary cloud over his head. Finally he stood up as if nothing had happened, straightening his kimono top with an absent shake of his head. PFTT, kids today don't know anything important. Anyway, run along, kid, I have things to do. Naruto just shrugged, already fairly bored with the man before him. Now where did Gamagaru go? Naruto suddenly turned back around with interest as the man began running through hand seals, unknowingly showing Naruto the precise way the chakra moved for the jutsu. Kuchio's no jutsu. The man slammed his hands down and a moment later the same large toad reappeared in the same cloud of smoke it had disappeared in. Naruto only watched with interest for a moment longer before turning back, deciding against returning to the spring if this pervert planned on sticking around. However, as he began to walk back he could help but notice the man precariously leaning over the edge of the divide, no doubt hoping for a better look through the steam. Naruto just couldn't help himself, he hadn't pranked anybody in far too long. Shinra Tensei. Naruto greatly toned down the technique, using only minimum chakra, however it was enough to overbalance the toad sage, tipping him over the edge and into the female side. Naruto walked back to his room grinning, the sounds of righteous feminine fury like music in his ears as he left. Naruto sat on one of the beds, Fu and Shizuku still had not returned from the hot springs and Masaru was sleeping in a pile of Shizuku's clothes. He was absently twirling a chakra rod in his hands, something that had become somewhat of an anxious tic recently. He was thinking about the encounter with the strange man and the things he could do. He was obviously a shinobi, yet with his strange headband Naruto couldn't be sure where from. More specifically, he was thinking about the man's invisibility jutsu and the way he summoned the toad. He believed the former worked by somehow bending light around the user, yet without seeing any hand signs he couldn't be certain. However, now the blonde knew such a thing was possible, he was certainly going to try and replicate it someday. The ability to turn completely invisible was just too useful to ignore. However, more immediately on his mind was the summoning jutsu. He had no idea exactly how it worked as none of the monks at the temple knew the technique. However, he knew it just couldn't be random as the man obviously had some kind of history with the toad, Gamagaru if he remembered right. He continued to think as he sat on the bed. It couldn't possibly be as simple as running through some hand seals and putting the right amount of chakra in, could it? Almost without even realizing, Naruto's hands began to almost instinctively run through the motions he had seen Jiraiya use. He molded his chakra in a certain way almost reflexively as a feeling he hadn't experienced in years overcame him, words suddenly imposing themselves in his mind. Animal path, Kuchio's. Smoke enveloped the room causing Naruto to cough violently into his hand as he waved the other in an attempt to clear the suffocating white smoke. When it did clear, a confused frown spread across his face. Standing there, looking rather confused himself, was Masaru. Strangely enough, the little monkey was holding onto one of his chakra rods, one of the ones he had created earlier and left in the room to see how long they lasted. It wasn't the most eloquent thing he had ever said, but it summed up the situation quite nicely. Frowning, he picked up the little capuchin and once again placed him across the room. By now the little simian had dropped the rod, so Naruto quickly created another. He tried to hand it to Masaru, but he seemed wary of the innocuous black stick, but in the end accepted it anyway, lightly nibbling on it. Naruto retreated across the room and once again ran through the hand seals before pausing at the last one. He stopped, allowing his chakra to settle before doing it again, but this time just manipulating his chakra instead of using the hand signs. He wasn't sure why, but for some reason it just felt more natural this way. Slamming his hands down, he was once again enveloped in smoke, but less this time. Just as confused as before, Masaru stood in front of him, this time quickly throwing the chakra rod across the room. Wow, this is so cool. He again moved across the room, staring intently at Masaru, who by this point was hopping up and down while chattering excitedly. He once again molded the chakra, focusing intently on the monkey, although this time it felt more difficult, like he was actually having to force it instead of it coming naturally. A third time Masaru appeared in front of him out of a veil of smoke, but it confirmed it was far more difficult. So I can summon him, but if they have one of my chakra rods it's easier. He frowned again before walking over to the monkey, quickly pushing some of his own chakra into the monkey's system. It wasn't too dangerous. As far as he could tell, the chakra between all living things besides plants was fairly similar, and his preta path automatically adjusted to the new body. He walked back and tried the summoning again, this time smirking as it once again flowed naturally, resulting in yet another instance of Masaru traveling across the room. Okay, no, it's not my chakra rods, but my chakra. I can summon anything connected with my chakra with ease. He smiled at the new discovery, and if the words that had appeared in his head were any indication, he had discovered a new path which made 3 down and 3 more to go. I wonder if I can summon anything else. He focused instead on a lamp that was across the room from him, once again molding his chakra in the correct way. However, this time it was almost as if his chakra refused to flow, making his hand stutter from the build-up before he allowed it to redisperse into his body with a small sigh. That time it had felt more exhausting than he thought possible, forcing him to sit back on the bed. The lamp hadn't budged an inch, causing the blonde to frown. Just to check, he retried it, only for the exact same results and another rush of tiredness to sweep over him. Okay, so I either can't summon objects or I don't have enough chakra to do it. Even so, it seems like an enormous waste. Even if I could get it to work, it's too tiring. Naruto spent another few minutes experimenting with his newfound ability, trying to discover everything he could about it. Quickly he managed to learn that if he implanted a chakra rod into anything, then he could then summon it. Likewise, if he pushed enough chakra into an object, he could summon that too, although it was still very exhausting. So I can summon animals and anything with my chakra in, but what about people? Curiously, he began to mold his chakra again, for some reason his thoughts instantly going to Fu. Without even thinking it through all the way, he slammed his hand down, the usual summoning matrix spreading out from his palm on the floor. He nearly fainted as the resulting smoke cleared, only to reveal a confused and very naked Fu. What happened? The mocha-skinned girl turned only to find herself in the room they were staying in, surrounded by quickly dissipating smoke. Naruto was also there, although he was turned away from her with his hand over his eyes. Gah! I'm so sorry, Fu. The mint-haired girl just blinked rapidly, wondering just what was going on. Naruto-san. How did I get here? Naruto turned slowly, still keeping his eyes covered as Fu was still just standing there, oblivious or uncaring of her nudity. I summoned you. Fu blinked once again before a look of incredulity crossed her features. She knew about summoning and summoning contracts, of course, but the possibility of one person summoning another despite the fact they were not a summoning animal and there was no contract was too much. You summoned me. The blonde just nodded slowly while Fu's eyebrow only raised slightly. Can I ask why? Naruto nodded slowly again, looking far more sheepish this time. And also why you are covering your eyes like that. At that, Naruto just looked at her in shock, or at least as much as he could convey with his eyes covered like that. What do you mean? You're naked. Fu just looked down, her eye quirking as if was the first time she had actually noticed. Oh, so I am. She looked up, her face completely unconcerned, not that Naruto could see that, all he could see was the vague outline of her chakra. Was there a reason you summoned me naked? At that, Naruto raised a hand, waving it madly as his face flushed bright red as he began to mumble gibberish before promptly fainting, luckily onto the bed. Fu blinked again at the situation before sighing and grabbing another towel. Shizuku would probably be worried at her sudden absence. Naruto hummed pleasantly as he woke up, enjoying the warmth of the bed and the softness of the blanket. It had been a long time since he had been able to sleep on a comfortable mattress, longer still since he had a pillow as well. The warmth in front of him was also incredibly pleasant, so he pulled it a little closer to him, finding the resulting murmur of appreciation cute. He took a deep and satisfied breath, finding an earthy but not unpleasant scent invading his nose. Wait. He cracked open a single violet eye only to see a sheet of wavy green hair in front of him. That wasn't right. Suddenly the hair belonged to shifted and Naruto suddenly found himself face to face with a sleepy, but definitely awake Fu. Morning, Naruto-san. The blonde just blinked, his early morning body still just a little too unresponsive to move. There was also the fact he had one arm wrapped around Fu's comfortably warm body. Fu, why are we in the same bed? The mint-haired girl simply yawned cutely into her palm, the one that wasn't trapped by Naruto's own arm. This is my bed, I didn't want to wake you, Naruto-san, so I let you stay here. Naruto nodded slowly, trying to inch his body away from the girl despite her rather adamantly refusing to let his arm leave. Okay, but then why is my arm wrapped around your body? With how Fu kept responding as if it was of little concern, the situation became increasingly surreal. Naruto-san is very warm. At that, Naruto simply nodded again slowly before succeeding in pulling his body out of her grip, much to her sleepy protest. He quickly jumped out of bed, sighing in relief when he found himself still wearing clothes at least. He looked down only to notice that Fu did not extend the same courtesy. Immediately his face took on a remarkable tomato-esque hue as he robotically moved away from the bed only to have Fu sit up, still completely uncaring about her indecency. "Ah Fu, please put some clothes on." Fu just tilted her head innocently, a look of confusion on her face that was far too cute to be anything less than an A-rank jutsu. "As I understood it, boys enjoy seeing girls without their clothes. Was I wrong?" Naruto's eyes just began to twitch violently, his blush didn't lose any of its intensity either. "Ah well, yes but right now it's you see." Naruto gave a small fleeting smile, desperately trying to keep his gaze strictly on Fu's orange eyes. However, it didn't last long and he happily collapsed back on the couch with a large grin and just the faintest trickle of blood running down his nose. It was of course at that moment Shizuku woke up, sleepily rubbing her eyes with another cute yawn. She looked around, noticing Fu just now pulling on her mesh undershirt while Naruto was seemingly asleep on the couch with a strange look. "Good morning Fu, what's going on?" The vedette just looked at the other girl for a moment, her confused gaze flickering between her and Naruto a few times. "I'm not entirely sure myself." A few days later and the ragtag group of Jinchuriki, monk, girl, and monkey were just about to cross over the border to Shimo no Kuni. Naruto had managed to get over the incident in the onsen but he hadn't quite been able to look at Fu without a small blush for the next day. Luckily Fu didn't mention it to Shizuku, either because she understood what she did or because she didn't think it was noteworthy. Naruto honestly didn't care either way. "Okay how about a three-headed bird?" Over the course of the past few days with little else to do on their journey, the group had taken to suggesting fantastical things for Naruto to try and summon. He had discovered that if he attempted to summon something which technically shouldn't exist, it would be created, in a way much like a shadow clone. The creature itself would have no real mind of its own and Naruto could even see through its Rinnegan eyes. It also made an amusing game to see if there was something he could not summon. Obliging, Naruto slammed his hand down on the ground as they walked. Out of the cloud of smoke which he had worked on reducing flew a small feathered bird with 3 heads, all of which had Rinnegan eyes. It gave Naruto a brief headache before he dismissed it with another burst of chakra. He had wondered what happened to the creatures he created once he dismissed them, but ultimately dismissed it as more suggestions came. "How about something that can warm us up?" Fu made a valid point. It had started to become extremely cold the closer they got to the border. Naruto was fine as he was running fire chakra through his system, but Fu and Shizuku, despite their warm cloaks, were starting to feel it. Naruto just put a finger to his lips as he contemplated what to summon before inspiration struck. "Okay, let's try this." He slammed his hand down and allowed the customary sealing matrix to spread out as the other two, and Masaru to a smaller degree, watched in anticipation. Out of the smoke crawled a small lizard. That in itself was not all that impressive. What was interesting was the creature was a dull shade of orange and had fire streaming down its back like a fin, ending with a small flame at the tip of its tail. "Whoa, never thought I'd ever get summoned." He turned around to look at the 3 humans, surprising them by his lack of Rinnegan in his beady eyes. "Did one of you summon me?" All 3 blinked simultaneously at the small flaming lizard as Naruto put his hand up hesitantly. "Yeah, I did." He shook his head and stared closer at the small lizard. "Wait, you're actually real." Surprisingly, the flaming lizard looked quite indignant about that despite its tiny body and young-sounding voice. "Of course I'm real. What did you expect when you summoned me?" Naruto just chuckled sheepishly and rubbed the back of his head. "Sorry about that, I didn't think salamanders actually existed." "Well, the fire elemental salamanders that is, not the amphibians." Somewhere far away, farther than Naruto would ever travel in his lifetime, a young pink-haired boy wearing a scaled scarf sneezed, startling his blue cat companion. "PFFT, you humans, always forgetting the past." The lizard sighed deeply, an amusing sight from such a little animal. "Well, if you wanna summon us again, I recommended you talk to Car-san. She'd be angry if all her kids started vanishing suddenly when we haven't ever given out a contract." Suddenly the creature blinked, again an amusing sight for such a supposedly legendary creature. "How did you summon me anyway?" Naruto chuckled, waving his hand dismissively at the little flame dweller. "Not really important, But as you're here, do you mind warming up my friends? The creature snorted indignantly again, exhaling a thin stream of flames that made Naruto nervous about letting it near either of the girls. What am I, a stove? Suddenly though he was lifted up into the air as Shizuku picked him up, startling the poor salamander. Surprisingly to the Miko impersonator, the flames running along his spine weren't hot, just pleasantly warm. Whoa whoa whoa, what do you think you're doing, lady? It was about to rather violently breathe fire at the person stupid enough to pick up a fire-breathing animal before it suddenly found itself staring into Shizuku's wide glittering eyes. You're so cute. If it was possible, the small lizard took on a slightly darker hue in what was equivalent to a reptile blushing. Well I suppose this one time it couldn't hurt, hey. It was suddenly rubbed along Shizuku's cheek in a strange facsimile of a hug which only seemed to darken its embarrassed red hue. So what's your name, little guy? The salamander might have protested indignantly at that comment but was too busy being embarrassed by Shizuku to properly notice. Kei Koinu. The group, now including the salamander perched rather happily on Shizuku's shoulder, carried on their way to Shimo no Kuni and soon enough had crossed the border. Like the country's name would suggest, the land of frost was incredibly cold. Snow blanketed the country in most places, tinging everything a shade of white. Shizuku was practically in awe when they reached the first village. All the roads were bathed in a pristine sheet of white while icicles seemed to hang from every overhang, glittering in the light from the lamps. Naruto too was impressed, however he didn't drop his usual expression to gawk like Shizuku did, neither did Fu, although it was for different reasons. Still, inside the green-haired girl was both wide-eyed and impressed. She had never seen snow before, it was never cold enough in Takagakure for it. Suddenly though Naruto seemed to notice something as they walked, apart from the streets being nearly empty from the cold. Hey, it's not raining. Time seemed to freeze for a moment for Shizuku as she just stopped right there in the middle of the street. She tentatively looked up only to confirm that it was not in fact raining. In fact it had not rained since they entered the country. What the? The Violette was looking up at the starlit sky with awe. It was so rare she was allowed to glimpse the uncovered sky she had almost forgotten how beautiful it was. Fu just looked around. She knew about Shizuku's condition. The girl had explained it to her when she had remarked about the constant downpour they seemed to be walking in before now. I suppose it is too cold. Shizuku just let out a happy squeal as she jumped about, nearly shaking Koinu from his perch on her shoulder. I love it here. Can we stay forever? She only got two very quick headshakes from Fu and Naruto, especially from the green-haired Jinchuriki who was currently shivering quite profoundly. Shizuku just let her head drop a little before bringing it up. Her eyes were large and watering slightly with her lower lip jutted out in the epitome of cuteness. However, she was miffed when Fu stared her down quite evenly with one hand covering Naruto's eyes. No. Shizuku pouted again, but it had no effect against the much more stoic Fu, so they continued on. Fu, could you let go of my eyes? I might gar. Naruto suddenly found himself on the ground, slightly dazed from bumping his head against the cold and hard ground. When he opened his eyes with a small wince, he found himself looking into the rather startled face of another girl, and not one he knew. She had dark hair in a bob around her head with bangs that curved to her face but pulled into a high ponytail at the back. She also wore a headband with a strange flower-like design engraved on it. Her captivating green eyes were glaring at him viciously. She was suddenly on her feet, instantly in a fighting position with her arms drawn back into fists. Her eyes occasionally darted around to the two other girls looking at her strangely, but most of the time they were squarely fixed on Naruto with a savage glare. Sorry about that, I couldn't see where I was going. Naruto picked himself up sedately, using his shakuju to help, seemingly ignoring the obviously hostile kunoichi in front of him. Shut up, you have to fight me now. Naruto just blinked once with an almost amused expression as he brushed the snow from his robes. If this is about knocking into you, I'm sure we can come to something more peaceful. The kunoichi only glared at him even harder, her hand already going for her kunai pouch as Fu mirrored the action, willing to protect the boy who had saved her without question. Naruto just raised a hand letting her know to stop. The mint-haired girl was hesitant, but she reluctantly moved her hand away from the pouch on her thigh. I don't care about that, you have those eyes, so I must fight you for the honor of my village. Naruto just sighed wearily as he rubbed the bridge of his nose, trying to think of some way he could end this in the next few moments so they could find an inn or temple for the night. Look, my companions and I, he was suddenly cut off as, almost faster than most could see, the kunoichi launched a barrage of shuriken at him. Fu and Shizuku let out simultaneous gasps while the kunoichi had a victorious smirk. All of those died though the instant the shuriken simply stopped in the air about a foot from Naruto's face before harmlessly falling to the floor. Naruto was still tiredly rubbing his eyes, acting like it hadn't even happened. It's rude to interrupt somebody you know. Now what's this about my eyes and your village? The kunoichi did nothing but growl slightly as she readied a kunai in her hand. Once again Naruto motioned for Fu to back away when she looked like she was about to jump in. Without warning the kunoichi rushed forward, obviously using chakra-augmented movements as she struck out. Naruto aptly dodged to the left, straight into the path of her other fist. In one sweeping motion he ducked back to an almost impossible angle, using chakra to keep his feet planted firmly on the ground before bending back up, skirting to the side of the kunoichi. She swerved on one foot, lashing out with a fist back hand which the blonde redirected calmly before doing the same to the leg she sent flying at her. Using the newfound leverage the older girl brought her other leg around, intent on taking Naruto's head. She might have succeeded if he hadn't suddenly ducked, letting her sail overhead to land gracefully back on her feet, still in her own taijutsu stance. Naruto just sighed as he ran a hand through his hair. He was a little tired from all those summonings. Are you sure there is no way we can settle this without violence? The kunoichi just shot him a murderous glare as she reeled her arm back before launching herself forward. Kua Reppuken. Naruto immediately saw the thin coat of wind chakra coating her outstretched fist. However, instead of blocking or dodging, he simply moved to one side quickly while grabbing her hand. Immediately it was drained of chakra, including the dangerous layer around her hand. The girl jumped back, looking at her hand incredulously before glaring at the young monk. I'll take that as a no then. The young blonde ran a hand through his hair as he dodged the next few blows, actually finding her attack style rather interesting, if not slightly repetitive. He was especially intrigued with the way she coated certain areas of her body with wind chakra like her fist or feet, speaking of which. Kua Sekaigiri. He swiftly moved out of the way of a vicious chakra-laced axe kick that might have split his entire body in half. The result was the girl slamming her heel into the ground, shattering it and producing a large cloud of dust. She emerged from the cloud, still sporting her enraged look while Naruto looked on, still smiling even if it was more tired than serene at this point. Fight me back, damn it. Don't insult me. Naruto put a hand to his forehead for a moment before looking back. His eyes were serious and the smile was gone. For a moment it made the kunoichi falter. Fine then, if it will let us leave in peace. With that he simply raised his hand palm up and surged chakra through the limb, his eyes focusing in on the kunoichi. Fu and Shaku. Suddenly the girl found she could not move forward, instead she began to float in the air, suspended as if by marionette strings. She could only flail uselessly, the gravity around her being reduced to nothing with only the minuscule air resistance allowing her to twist and turn her body. What did you do to me? Put me down right now and finish this fight. Naruto sighed as he walked forward, the jingling of his shakuju sounding strangely ominous as he approached. That's what I'm doing. With that he gently prodded the girl with the long staff, immediately causing her body to seize up as her chakra flow simply stopped. A second later he cancelled his other technique and the girl dropped out of the air, straight into Naruto's arms before he quickly set her on the ground. That paralysis should wear off in about 10 minutes, until then why don't you explain just what you are doing? The kunoichi glared at him angrily as she struggled against invisible bonds, her muscles refusing her brain's signals. Damn it, let me go. Naruto just sighed as he looked around, quickly spotting an inn that had vacancies. It would put a large dent in his Ryo pouch but it would have to do. Alright, you're coming with us. We can settle this inside where it's warmer. With that he swiftly lifted the older kunoichi onto his shoulder, setting off for the inn. It would be surprising to any passersby to see a young boy of perhaps 11 or 12 hoisting a teenage girl a few years older than him and definitely taller, seemingly without effort. Especially considering the two girls walking behind him as if it were the most normal thing in the world. None of them noticed the single set of yellow eyes with bar-like pupils watching from the shadows of a nearby building before they disappeared in a burst of smoke. Okay, so we'll start off with names I guess. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, That's Shizuku over there and she's Fu. He motioned to each girl as he said the names before looking at the kunoichi expectantly. Strangely, after they had gotten a room and he had set her on the bed, she had become somewhat sullen, her eyes even had an air of defeat. Right now she was sitting back against the headboard with her knees drawn up against her chest, glaring at the trio half-heartedly. Naruto took the opportunity to get a better look at the girl, now that she wasn't trying to kill him. She was a few years older than him, maybe 14 or 15, and already possessed the air of a distinguished kunoichi, even if her pride seemed a little dented. She wore a tight-fitting black bodysuit that left her right arm and left shoulder bare that was tied around the middle by a lighter strip of cloth. She wore the traditional kunai pouch as well as a shoulder guard, but by far the most noticeable feature of the outfit was the window cut in the chest showing off her already impressive developing bust. Shut up. It came out as barely a whisper from behind her knees, her hair falling over her eyes despite the forehead protector. Look, if we don't talk then how are we supposed to get this whole mess straightened out? Again the kunoichi gave him a cold glare with her emerald orbs. Shut up. This time it was anything but quiet, she all but shouted it out in anger before her head dipped, tears rolling down her face as her hands trembled from where they were wrapped around her knees. I don't want this any more than you do. At that Naruto just sighed with a look of utter confusion, he was lost now. What are you talking about? The girl looked up again, tears beginning to dry as her pride took hold, preventing her from showing weakness in a situation like this, even though it was a little late. You defeated me in fair and single combat. By the laws of Nadeshiko village you are to become my husband. You could literally hear a pin drop in the room as the girl was suddenly met by three identical looks of shock and incredulity. What? Amazingly the cry was simultaneous as well, although this time it was only Naruto and, surprisingly, Fu. They shared a quick look between them before returning to the kunoichi currently wiping away her tears. I'm supposed to become your what? The girl huffed indignantly as she cleared the last of the streaks down her face. I am affronted as much as you are, to have to marry a bearer of the accursed Rinnegan. It's the highest dishonor I could imagine. Naruto blinked at that, very nearly missing what she said in the shock over this new situation. Wait, you said something about my eyes earlier. Just what does this have to do with the Rinnegan? The girl snarled in anger as her fists tightened to the point her knuckles turned white. It has everything to do with those damn eyes. Them and the twice cursed sage who bore them before you. Again Naruto blinked in confusion before falling back into a chair, rubbing his eyes. He was tired, damn it. This was the last thing he wanted to be dealing with. Alright, you better start at the beginning if any of this is going to make sense. The girl glared at him for his dismissive tone but nodded firmly anyway. I suppose I could do as much for my future husband. She practically ground it out through clenched teeth which elicited a rare glare from the blonde himself. Don't call me that. The kunoichi returned the stare full force until she looked away. When Naruto wanted to be he could be quite intimidating despite his lacking in stature. Very well, you should know I am Shizuka Hitohana, heir to the royal family in Nadeshiko village. We are a people of fierce warriors, trained from the moment we could walk to be the fiercest fighters in the elemental nations. We are also mostly composed of women, thanks to the sage. At Naruto's blank look where she expected some kind of guilt she sneered before continuing. The legend goes that the Nadeshiko tribe were a band of powerful mercenaries in the times of the sage. They once crossed paths and it led to the most powerful member of the tribe challenging the sage to a duel. She grimaced at that, obviously not enjoying the next part of the story. Apparently the sage refused, much like you did to me. She shot him a quick glare that went unanswered. Finally though the duel happened, only to end in the warrior's quick and humiliating defeat at the sage's hands. Again another glare sent Naruto's way. However when the sage turned his back the warrior pulled out a blade, hoping to catch the man off guard only for the sage to catch the blade in his bare hand. The blade was snapped in half and held at our warrior's neck only for the sage to discard the weapon in disgust. She looked down again. Naruto couldn't tell if she was ashamed for her ancestor or saddened by what came next. The sage was said to have placed a curse of sorts on all Nadeshiko women, that they could only ever bear daughters for the remainder of the days in hopes it would quell their bloodthirsty ways. However the tribe began to die out with no males to continue the line. Eventually a law was passed that if a Nadeshiko woman was ever beaten in fair combat the man would be taken as a husband. In this way we have managed to stay alive, it is the only way. She glared at Naruto again, to which he simply sighed deeply. And that it is why it is my job as a proud Nadeshiko woman to find and destroy anybody bearing those cursed eyes. She earned glares from the two girls for that, especially Fu, who since the announcement Naruto would be taken as her husband had been incredibly cold. Naruto finally raised his head from his palm, looking at Shizuka dead in the eyes, almost making her flinch from the steely violet orbs. That's the stupidest thing I have ever heard. A certain spiky white-haired pervert was joyfully giggling as he peered through a small telescope that peeked over the edge of a hot spring. Jiraiya truly loved Kuni. It was his favorite place for gathering vital research. That's right, honey, complete gold. He quietly giggled to himself before his viewing was rudely interrupted by a small puff of smoke. He blinked once before putting down the telescope and looking at the small toad that had appeared by his feet. Jiraiya-sama. The tiny toad spoke with a surprisingly deep voice which just sounded strange from a creature that small. Huh, Gamasupai, what are you doing here? I asked you to keep an eye on that blonde kid to look for signs he is Minato's boy. The toad nodded quickly with a look of urgency. I know, but you have a standing order with all toads to report directly to you if we run into any kunoiki from Nadeshiko village. The great toad sage paled slightly at that. He didn't have the best reputation in that village and he still had yet to settle with their leader because he lacked an apprentice, not that he planned on taking one any time soon. Once he realized the situation though, he sighed as he placed his head in his hand. No, Gamasupai, only if the kunoiki was near me. Where did you spot her? The toad looked up proudly. He was always glad to share information with his summoner. It was his job as an infiltration toad. Shimo no Kuni. Jiraiya sighed again with a look of exasperation. And where are we now? The toad took a quick look around, used to most environments due to its extensive work spying for Jiraiya. Kuni. Suddenly it frowned as Jiraiya just nodded with irritation. And how do you plan on getting back to Shimo no Kuni to continue spying on the kid? The toad looked down ashamedly at that. I had not considered that. Jiraiya just sighed. He loved the toads, but sometimes they could be denser than an Iwa shinobi. Well, I'm sure I'll run into him sooner or later, especially if it's Naruto. If he's out here I'm sure it's for a good reason. His words were full of confidence but internally was a different story. He was worried for his godson but he could hardly drop what he was doing, currently looking into Orochimaru's possible activities in the land of hot water. He gave both an external and internal sigh, wondering just what was going on if Naruto was just wandering around the elemental nations. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.